In this video, I'll be discussing some of the main themes in each of the three lays of Marie de France that we read this week. And just like last week, I'll say it is up to you whether you want to watch this video before you read the lays so you know what to look for, or after you read the lays and you want to make sense of them. As I've been doing in our earlier lecture videos, I'm going to remind you that comparison is an incredibly powerful tool for understanding and exposing some of those main differences between two works of literature. So it's really useful to compare Marie de France's lays with Beowulf's. I'd ask you to take a minute to compare the lays with Beowulf. Maybe pause this video and just think for a few seconds. What are some of the most salient differences that you notice between those two bodies of work? One of the things that I notice is, I like to think of Beowulf as a text that is just kind of soaked in testosterone. It's so male-centric, it's so battle-centric, and there are very few women in the text. I think that Marie's stories offer a really interesting counterpart to the world, the masculine world of Beowulf. In fact, I'm going to draw our attention to a line at the bottom of the screen. Generally, women tend to be a more central part of Marie de France's stories than even in the work of her contemporaries. So Marie is very interested in devoting attention to women characters in her work. One of the overarching themes across her lays tends to be on forbidden love, love that is looked down upon by society and that is criminalized or punished for various reasons. And because people pursue this forbidden love, they necessarily experience suffering because they're going against social and societal norms by doing so. So we see women who choose sexual pleasure outside of marriage in Milan and Lenval. We see love that must remain a secret that no one can know about in both Milan and Lenval. And in Bisclavret, we see men who come to love men. These are a lot of interesting forms of forbidden love that we'll be able to address more specifically in each lay. Moving forward, I'm going to talk about each lay specifically so we can zero in on some of the themes that are present there. Now, whenever we are reading a work of literature, we want to look for things that the story seems to bring attention to. It seems to want us to notice them because it talks about them so much, or it keeps coming back in the story. That happens a lot in Milan with two visual symbols that we just can't miss. The first is the ring. There's a ring, actually a few rings in this story that just keep showing up. It starts with Milan when he gives a ring to his love or his amie, who later on gives a ring to their son when she sends their son to her sister. The son wears the ring, and eventually Milan recognizes the ring. So we have this through line through the entire story in which the ring is both transmitted across this familial unit and also the thing that kind of ties them together. So one of the questions I want you to think about in your discussion post is, why this ring? Why does it persist throughout the narrative? What role is it playing? And why is the ring the symbol rather than something else? I have kind of similar questions about the swan. We see the swan show up as a way for Milan and his amie to communicate with one another. I want you to think about, how is the swan a symbol for their love? And also, why a swan? Why not a pigeon? Why not a dog? Those details really matter when we're thinking about the weight of a particular symbol. Now, the last theme in Milan that I want to draw our attention to is a very interesting tension between father and son, between Milan and the son that he's eventually reunited with. Clearly, we all hope for Milan and his son to be reunited. They're a family. They're his long-lost son. And yet, the story introduces a surprising amount of tension between Milan and his son. They don't realize that they're related, but they see each other as adversaries, as foes. If you turn to line 289 in the lay, you'll see that Milan hears of his son. He doesn't know it's his son at this point, as a successful rival knight who's doing really well in jousting matches. And this fills Milan with rage. That's a word straight from the text. And he wishes to, line 352, injure him, harm him, do his worst. Once he does that, then Milan says, I will go seek out my son. Again, he doesn't know that this is his son. So his son gets portrayed to him as a fellow rival man. And this ultimately comes to a head when they joust one another, which contains the tremendous potential for violence and injury and even death. Ultimately, however, the ring comes back and reunites them as father and son. But a really prominent question here is, why does this story stage this tension between father and son, even if they don't know they're father and son? What is it saying about male-male relationships, even within the family, and how they vie against one another for supremacy? Is that something that destabilizes the family? Is it something that destabilizes society? That's something I want you to think more about. Moving forward to Lanval, one very prominent feature of this story is that we have this mysterious fairy who has this incredibly ennobling power over many things, but especially over Lanval. Lanval not only falls in love with her, but he agrees to keep the pact that she insists on. She says, you must tell no one about our love. So she wields a tremendous and remarkable amount of power over Lanval. And one aspect of the genre of courtly love, that's not a thing we focused on earlier, but I'll mention it here, is that a man must prove he is worthy to a woman. And we see that playing out here in this lay. Later on, we see that Lanval can't do this. He breaks the promise. And in so doing, he also breaks the chivalric code. He slanders Guinevere. He says terrible things to her. And even though Guinevere seems like a very bad person, and she seems to deserve Lanval's harsh words, it still implicates Lanval in breaking the chivalric code and breaking his commitment to the fairy. So he fails that particular test that the fairy has placed on him. And then finally, something I want us to think about is the way that the fairy, when she ultimately comes to rescue Lanval at the end of the story, is portrayed in a really strikingly similar way to Jesus in the Gospels, especially when he enters Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. We have her entering the court on a pure white palfrey. She enters slowly and solemnly and ultimately comes to rescue Lanval and to take him away. What do you think Marie is doing by invoking these images of Christ through this kind of transcendent female character? Okay, moving on to Bisclavret. Because this story is about a werewolf, we have a lot of themes relating to the differences and the similarities between human life and animal or beast life. For example, while Bisclavret is clearly the beast in this story, the beginning of the lay describes werewolves as a savage beast. They say werewolves are terrible creatures, but we see Bisclavret to have a lot of integrity, virtue, honor, kindness throughout the story. So he actually seems to push back against these stereotypes about werewolves. And when we compare Bisclavret to his wife, we seem to see a much more sinister character in his wife, who is willing to betray her husband, steal his clothes, shack up with another man, even though she's married. So it presses us to examine what actually separates humans from animals or beasts. What is the thing that makes a difference? If we have a very humane Bisclavret and a very beastly wife, how can we suss out the difference between them? A secondary concern about humanity is the role of clothing. You'll notice that Bisclavret is confined to his werewolf status when his wife steals his clothes. And his humanity is restored to him when those clothes are returned to him. What role does clothing have in establishing us as human beings? And then finally, I alluded to this in many lectures ago about Marie, Bisclavret and the king, or Bisclavret and the king. I'm waiting for this bar to go away. And of course, my face is in the way again. If you turn to line 300 in Bisclavret, you'll see how the king ran up to the bed to embrace his man, kiss him 100 times and more. This is a admittedly surprising ending to this work, in which the king embraces and kisses Bisclavret 100 times and more on his bed. It's a very erotically charged environment for this to be happening. And it raises a lot of suggestions that Bisclavret and the king themselves are in love with one another in ways that the story surprises us with. So we can talk about what Marie seems to be saying by incorporating this kind of homoerotic love story at the end of Bisclavret as well. Are there connections between some of these questions about human and animal in relation to what we would today call sexual orientation? Is she trying to draw parallels between these harmful divisions between human and animal, um, straight and not straight? That's a question I would love to hear you think about in your discussion posts. That's where I will see you after this. Take care, everyone.